You gotta pack up your tent and ride. Pack up your tent and ride. Good grub cooking on a fire tonight. Pack up your tent and ride.
Hi, I'm Fraser Douglas, and I was an avid tent camper for over 55 years. Recently, I've started doing campfire cooking videos. In this video, I want to show you how we make Southern-style biscuits over the campfire in about 30 minutes. Hope you enjoy this video.
Southern-style biscuits, or more accurately, baking powder biscuits, is a bread that can be cooked very quickly without having to use yeast and without having to wait for the dough to rise. As such, it was an easy way to make bread on a camping trip and became very popular in the warmer southern states for several reasons. Consequently, these biscuits quickly became a staple in many southern homes and on the chuck wagons that accompanied the cattle drives from Texas up to Kansas and Nebraska. And most people who have grown up in the southern states, including myself, have eaten a lot of southern-style biscuits, mainly for breakfast, but also for any other meal. Although it's relatively easy to make a decent-tasting Southern-style biscuit, it is much more difficult to make a good-tasting, flaky Southern-style biscuit, especially over a campfire. In simple terms, it's just trying to find the right combination of flour, fat, leavening, liquid, and baking temperature. But small differences in these elements can make big difference in the taste of the biscuit, and so it requires a lot of practice. And so it's important to have a written recipe with exact measurements and follow this recipe much more closely than when cooking other foods. Traditionally, all-purpose flour was used to make Southern-style biscuits, and that's what we'll use in this recipe, because I believe it makes the best tasting biscuit. I have always used white lily flour over my lifetime, and that's what I'll use for this video, but other people have argued that King Arthur or gold medal is actually a better tasting flour for making biscuits. If the recipe in this video seems overwhelming, there are shortcuts you can take that will produce a decent tasting biscuit. For example, you could use a self-rising flour that mixes the baking powder and some salt in with the flour. Or you could use a baking mix such as Biscuits that also combines a buttermilk-like acid in with the flour. Or you could just buy a roll of Grands, keep it in your cooler for a few days, and then bake the biscuits without having to mix anything together. Traditionally, pioneer cooks would have used lard as their fat, but very few people use lard today. My sister makes a very good biscuit with Crisco, but most people make their biscuits today with butter, and that's what I'll use in this recipe. For their leavening agent, early pioneer cooks before 1850 used either potash, cream of tartar, saleratus, or sourdough starter as leavening agents for their biscuits. But around 1843, baking powder was developed, and it slowly became the preferred leavening agent for these biscuits. Traditionally, buttermilk has been used to hold all of the dry ingredients together because buttermilk is acidic, and the acid facilitates the production of the carbon dioxide bubbles from the leavening agent to make the biscuits rise and be more flaky. But we don't drink buttermilk, and we don't use it for any other kind of cooking, and so any buttermilk that we might buy to make biscuits would spoil in our refrigerator before we would use it again. So we're going to make our buttermilk by mixing a small amount of whole milk with a little vinegar. When mixing your flour and your baking powder, you'll also need to add a small amount of sugar and a small amount of salt. In your home oven, you should bake these biscuits at 450 degrees for 10 to 13 minutes. But in the campsite, we must bake them in a hot oven for 10 minutes and then adjust the number of coals on top and below the oven based on the baking progress. And now let me show you some special equipment that I use to bake these biscuits. First, I'll chill this 10-inch metal pie plate, and then I'll use it to cut my cold butter into my dry ingredients. In our camp kitchen, we have 3 different biscuit cutters that all nest together. Today, I'll be using the larger 15-ounce can that is about 3 inches in diameter. I'll bake our biscuits in this vintage 10-inch Wagner ware Dutch oven without legs. You can find these old Dutch ovens in many flea markets and antique stores and also on eBay. I prefer a Dutch oven without legs to a camp oven with legs because the 1.5-inch legs on most camp ovens are too short to allow easy manipulation of the coals under the oven. To my Wagner ware oven, I have added a 10-inch Lodge camp oven lid. But these camp oven lids are very hard to find. So if you can't find one, you can use a regular Lodge 10-inch lid with a cake ring on top. And I'll use 2 3-inch trivets. I use the first one to hold the Dutch oven above the hot coals on the bottom, and I'll use the second trivet to hold my hot lid when I'm checking my biscuits for doneness. So here's our camp kitchen setup. We have a utility table with our mixing area on one side and our baking accessories available to us on the other side. Then we have a Camp Chef Dutch oven table with our campfire on one side and our baking area on the other side. Behind me is a metal table that holds the utensils and ingredients that would normally be stored in the back of our car. Now let me describe how we make these biscuits. As previously stated, we need to be very precise when baking these Southern-style biscuits. First, we need to cut 3 tablespoons of cold butter into small pats. Then we need to cut each pat into even smaller pieces, and then we need to re-chill this butter. Second, we need to start our fire and then place our Dutch oven close to the fire so that it can warm just a little bit. Third, we need to mix a 1/2 cup of whole milk with 1/2 tablespoon of vinegar, and then set it aside so that it can begin to combine. Fourth, we need to mix 1 cup of all-purpose flour with 1 1/4 teaspoons of baking powder, 1 heaping teaspoon of sugar, and 1/4 teaspoon of salt. These are our dry ingredients.
Okay.
Fifth, we need to combine our dry ingredients with our cold butter and then use a fork to cut the cold butter into the dry flour.
Pretty good. Looking for big pieces. I don't see any. Whoops, there's a big one. And now,
Sixth,
buttermilk.
we need to gently stir the buttermilk in with our flour and butter.
Slowly mix this all together until all the milk is combined. It's looking pretty good. And now,
Seventh, we need to flour our surface and our dough, then gently pat the dough down to about 1 inch high and fold over, and then repeat this about 5 or 6 more times.
yeah. Got it?
And now I'll just form one more biscuit with the remaining dough. If you were cooking these biscuits in your home oven, you'd set your thermostat for 450 degrees. But we just have to try to make the oven as hot as possible. And so I'll put a few coals under the oven and then try to completely cover the lid. I thought I had put enough wood on this fire to make plenty of coals, but as it turns out, I didn't have quite enough to get my tops of my biscuits brown. After 10 minutes, I checked the biscuits, and I could see that they're not cooking as fast as I had hoped. And so I added more coals and cooked them for another 4 minutes.
Still need to cook on the bottom. Okay, I'm gonna pour a little butter on them.
Stop the video.
No, just keep on. We'll cook them for a few more minutes.
After 4 more minutes, they were completely cooked on the inside, but the tops were not as brown as I had hoped. But they still were very, very good.
Well, I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I hope you'll try making some Southern-style biscuits in your campsite in the near future. Thanks for watching.
For more information about campfire cooking and other family camping topics, please visit my website, moderntentcamping.com. In particular, I encourage you to read the content on my campfire cooking page.